Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from OnlinePhotographyTraining.com. Welcome to my video series, Mastering the Nik Collection. Several years ago, the Nik Collection of plugins was the #1 set of plugins for Photoshop and Lightroom. Cashing in on their success, they sold off to Google. Google marketed the suite for a couple years with a few updates. Then they announced that they would not be updating the software any longer, and they made it free to download. Around that time, I did a set of training videos on the software that proved to be very popular. Recently, the company DxO purchased the rights to the Nik Collection and announced that they would be developing and updating it. Although it's no longer free, it is nice to have a caretaker for this software because it is very good. With all the good things happening with Nik, I decided to update my training videos on the product. This new series will be more in-depth and thorough than the previous series. Please be aware that I have no affiliation with the company. I'm not being paid by them to do these videos, and if you purchase the software, I will not be making a commission on the sale. With that said, if you could do me a favor, if you like these videos, please click the thumbs up button and share them. Finally, if you can make a donation, I would greatly appreciate it. That info is in the description below this video, along with a link to my Code of Ethics statement. Let's get started. This is the first of 3 videos on HDR Efex Pro 2 by Nik Software. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use it as a standalone program. We're going to load a set of bracketed images directly into HDR Efex Pro 2. In our next video, we're going to use it as a Lightroom plugin, and in the video after that, we're going to use it as a Photoshop plugin. As you can see, I have the HDR Efex Pro 2 open, and I need to load my bracketed set of images into it. To do that, go up to File, then down to Open Images. And on my desktop, I have a folder called HDR, and I'm going to open that. And you'll notice that I have a number of raw files inside of this folder, but they're grayed out. They're grayed out because HDR Efex Pro 2 does not directly work on raw files. So you're going to have to convert your raw files into something else. Well, don't convert them into PSD files because you'll notice that those are grayed out as well. So HDR Efex Pro 2 does not work on RAW files, and it does not work on PSD files. Well, it does work on TIFF files, and you see I have the 5, or my set of images. It happens to be 5 there, and they're active, and I could select them. It also will work on JPEG. So if you do shoot RAW, you're going to have to convert your RAW files to either a TIFF file or a JPEG. I recommend that you convert them to a TIFF file. That's as close to RAW as you probably could get. Still a little bit, it's still not RAW, but at least it's kind of close, and it's better than JPEG. Now, in my opinion, I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't think HDR Efex Pro 2 is that great. It's a little bit older, dated software. In my opinion, Aurora HDR 2019 is much better, and even the HDR functionality that is in Lightroom is much better. But if you did buy the Nik Software suite, you did get HDR Efex Pro 2, so that's why I'm showing you these videos, or doing these videos, demonstrating how to use the software. So I'm going to select all 5 of these bracketed images. Now, you don't have to have 5. You could have less, you could have more, whatever works for you and your scene. Now, I'm going to select these 5 bracketed images and click Open. Now, what it's going to do, it's going to be combining them in a preliminary way and showing us a preview of our combined bracketed images. And then we're going to have some choices that we could do for our merging of these images. Now, you'll see here's our preview right here. And up above, you'll see there's our 5 images. And you can see that I separated each exposure by 1 stop. Now, to the right are our choices. At the very top is alignment. If you did not use a tripod, definitely check this box. I did not use a tripod through these shots. I handheld this, so I definitely need this checked. The program will look at the images at the pixel level and align them pretty flawlessly. I suggest that you check this box even if you're using a tripod, because it's been my experience, even when I use a tripod, sometimes I just move it slightly, or maybe the wind's blowing or something and it just moved very slightly, and it doesn't hurt to check this box. It just will take slightly longer for it to create your merged image from your bracketed set. So check that box and don't worry about that. Below that is ghost reduction. If you have something moving between exposures, something in the scene that is moving between exposures, check this box and it will help reduce any ghosting that would happen. If you're outside and it's slightly breezy out, trees are moving a little bit, or maybe grasses are moving a slight amount, check this box, and I found that a strength of around 40% works great for something like that. If it's a lot more windy out than just a slight breeze, then go to 60, 80, or 100% on strength. If someone is moving through the scene from exposure to exposure, click ghost reduction and click somewhere around 80%. I found works pretty well for something like that. You're going to have to experiment with ghost reduction and see what works best for you. In the case of this image, this is the inside of a basilica. Nothing was moving inside the basilica. No people are there. So I'm not going to check that box at all. Now, if you have chromatic aberration in your image, for those of you not familiar, often because of some lenses, you may get what's called chromatic aberration. That is when you have a high contrast edge, something that is dark in front of something that is light, or vice versa. And that edge, you'll get sometimes a little color line going across that edge. That line could be anywhere from red to purple. If you do, check this box, and then you could come in and adjust either red cyan slider or the blue yellow slider to best remove that chromatic aberration. As soon as you move either of these sliders, this little box will pop up, which will give you kind of a microscopic view. So you can move it to an edge that you know has chromatic aberration on it. Like right there, I don't see any. But if I did, I would move it there, and then I could move the red cyan slider or the blue yellow slider to eliminate that chromatic aberration. Once you're ready, you've done with that, then you could just click Create HDR. And what the program will now do, it will take those settings we just set. In this case, it was alignment and chromatic aberration. I didn't do anything with ghosting. And it's going to apply those to our final, our preliminary HDR image, which we'll show here. And then we could do some adjusting to this image. And once it just takes a second. And as I mentioned, if you have ghosting checked, if you have alignment checked, if you have chromatic aberration checked, it takes just a little longer to do it. Now, once it combines your bracketed set of images, in this case I used 5 images, it's going to go over and pick a preset. Over here on the left-hand side, you'll see we have our preset library, and it's going to default, by default, pick our first preset, which is called default. And you can see that. Now, in the case of this basilica, this isn't a very good rendering of what I saw when I was there. It was actually relatively dark inside of this basilica, and this is very, very bright. So I don't really care for that preset. And what I always recommend to folks when they're using software is find a preset that gets you at the very least close to something you like, and then you could adjust your preset from that point on. Now, in the case of Nik Software, or at least HDR Efex Pro 2, you kind of have to pick a preset, then go over to the right, and then you could adjust the specific properties of that preset. Now, in case here, we could see that we have 28 different presets come in HDR Efex Pro 2. They're broken down into different sections. We have 4 architecture presets. So you could go with indoor 1, outdoor 1. You have 6 artistic preset. We could go to structurized 2. You can see that's starting to give us that kind of over-the-top HDR look. We have 9 realistic presets. We have balance. kind of a more uh, true rendering to what was in that scene. 4 landscape presets, and we got like a graduated one. Let's see, and graduated 2, something like that. Then we got 5 surreal presets. Now these will be probably over the top HDR look. You know, you see that it's got that heavy HDR look to them with the surreal. And then if you favorite a preset, it will show up in this category here. So if we go back to all, and let's say that I like, and as a matter of fact, let's go back to landscape, and I pick graduated 1. Let's say I like this one. Right here to the left, this is the 27th preset, 27, graduated 1. See that little star? If I click on that little star, it's now added to my favorites, and you'll see that it's up here in favorites. So you could add presets to your favorites. You could remove them by just clicking on that little star again, and it will take it out of your favorites folder or category there. So pick a preset that gets you close. Let's just stick with this one right now. Once you do, you could go over here to the right-hand side and you could more adjust the preset or adjust the image to your liking. And we'll start out at the top with tonal compression. You'll see there's 2 sliders there, and they're preset now to whatever that preset was. So if I go to like balanced, you'll notice those sliders moved. And it's like that for all of these tabs. They're going to move to whatever the setting was at in the preset. Well, you could come in here and readjust it. Tonal compression will, as you move it to the right, will bring your highlights down and open your shadows up. And it's a rather dramatic adjustment. If I move it to 100%, you'll see it's bringing the highlights way down and opening the shadows way up. So it's actually making our image flatter when we're doing that. If I move it to the left, it's going to make the shadows darker and the highlights brighter. So it's increasing contrast actually. Method strength, as you move it to the right, that's going to give you more of an HDR look. Kind of that kind of HDR, really kind of, you know, strong structure to the image. If you move it to the left, it's going to soften the image more. You can see how we're getting more of a softer look with that method strength. Below that, you'll see HDR method, but that doesn't show anything. You'll notice there's a little triangle here. That's called an expose triangle. When we click on that, you'll notice there's 3 sliders there. And they have actually set positions on the sliders. So if you go, let's say, to depth, it's set at the 3rd position from the left. If I go to the far left, you can see how it kind of takes some of that structure away. If I go all the way to the strongest part, you can see it's adding quite a bit of structure to the shot. If I go to detail, the name implies, as I move it to the right, it's going to add more detail to the image. And you can see on this very far right, they're calling it grungy, and it's got this kind of over-the-top HDR look. And as I move it, there's detail. It's still a little bit too HDR looking for me. There is accentuated. There is realistic. And there is soft. I kind of like realistic, so we'll go with that. Then we have drama. Right now it's set at the 3rd spot from the left, and that's called deep. If I go all the way to the right, that's grainy. And actually that doesn't look too bad for this image if you ask me. There's sharp, kind of like that one. There's dingy. There's deep. There's natural. And there's drama. I think for this image, I kind of like sharp. So I like that. So this is this first tab called tone compression. Now you could always jump back and readjust things, and I probably will once we go with tonality. Now tonality is the actual tone of the image, the exposure, the shadows, the highlights, contrast, black point, white point, and structure. Structure is kind of like clarity in Lightroom. Let's start with exposure. As I mentioned, I think this is actually a little too bright for the actual scene. So I'm going to bring exposure down. The church, or this basilica, was a lot darker than what is being rendered here. So I want to bring exposure down quite a bit. It was actually very, very dark in here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, highlights, I'd like to get a little more detail maybe in that stained glass, but I'm not sure I'll be able to. As I bring highlights down, you can see it kind of makes it look a little filmy looking. I don't know if that's a good way to put it. But whites aren't helping either. But you could jump around as I just did. We'll move highlights up a little bit. Shadows. Just kind of, what I generally do is I just grab a slider and move it right, move it left a little bit. You got to wait for it to render. You know, depending on the speed of your computer, it may take longer to render. If you want to reset a slider, just double click right on the slider and you'll reset it. So if you have a slider and you just want to reset it, just double click on it. We'll put it to its 0 position usually. So I'll pull that down a little bit. Contrast down a little bit. I think that's fine. As you move structure to the right, as I mentioned, it's kind of like clarity in Lightroom. You can see it's adding a lot of sharpness, for lack of a better term, to the image. That's tonality. Below that is color, and we have saturation, temperature, and tint. The image to me is a little bit too warm, so I'm going to take temperature and I'm going to pull it down a little bit. And I'm going to take tint and I'm going to move that to the right a little bit, and that'll help cool everything down just a touch. Maybe went a little too far on those. So just a little bit, like that. Saturation is at 11% at the moment. Maybe it's a little too saturated for my taste. So I'm going to pull it down to like -3. And again, this is all subjective, whatever you like, and it's always going to vary from image to image. Then we have these selective adjustments, and if we open that up, you'll see that we have control points that we could put. So we could actually do adjustments to very specific parts of our image. And I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of this. In our next video, I'm going to get more in depth about our selective adjustments, our control points, and how to use these. But to give you an idea, if we click and we add a control point, let's say right here on that stained glass window, you could see that we have a number of different adjustments we could do. And if you just hover over the slider, it will tell you, it will give you a tip of what that slider is. This is exposure, contrast, saturation, structure, blacks, whites, temperature, tint, and method strength. And now you'll notice that these are all sliders that are up here globally. We now could do locally with control points. So we could take that, and by default, everything's going to be at 0. So when you apply a control point, it's not doing anything to your image. So let's say I want to, let's say, lower the white point of those windows. See, okay, so like that. And let's see what else. Maybe exposure a little bit of the windows. All right, so like that. So again, I'm going to get more in depth with the control points in our next video. If you want to duplicate a control point, hold the Alt or Option key in. It's Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac, and then go right to this little button here while you're holding that key in, and you'll duplicate the control point. And you could keep doing that to add control points, in this case, on all the windows. And like that. So we have a number of control points. You could see 6 of them added across these windows that are going across the top. Again, in our next video, I'll get a lot more in depth on our selective adjustments and how to use these in HDR Efex Pro 2. Finishing. We'll click on that, and you can see that we could add a vignette. You'll have to roll it down by clicking on this expose triangle, and then turn it on, and you could have different presets. Lens 1, Lens 2. Takes a second to render. Lens 3. Black frame. I'm going to go with Lens 2. I kind of like that look. You could then come in and just change the attributes for that vignette you chose, in this case Lens 2. You could, move it to the right to make it brighter, like a white vignette, or move it to the left to make it darker. Like that, I think is good. You could change it from a circle to a rectangle with this slider. Go with more of a rectangular look. And you could actually change the size. How much does it encroach upon the middle of the frame? Move it to the right, it starts to come down more into the middle of the frame. You also could place the center. If you have a subject in your image, let's say you have a person standing over here, and you don't want the vignette over the person, you want the center of the vignette to be over the person's face, you could click right here, and then click somewhere. Let's say that person was over here on the right. I just click right there, and then it centers the vignette over there. Now in this case, I want the center of the vignette in the center of the image. So we're going to go right there. So there is finishing. And below that we have graduated neutral density. By the actual preset I used had a neutral density there. And you can see it had upper tonality. It was turned down a little bit to make those windows a little darker. The lower tonality, it was turned up a little bit. I could kind of even it out maybe. Those to the left. The blend, how abrupt or how much you want the transition zone, how you want the transition zone to act. You could just kind of blend it in. It's not as pronounced in this image. It would be more pronounced on a landscape image that has a very defined sky and land. That's where blend would be more applicable and more noticeable. Vertical shift, whether you want it perfectly horizontal or vertical, where you want it up or down on the image. And the rotation is whether you want it horizontal or vertical, you can see. You can move that around too. Leave that right in the middle. So that is the graduated neutral density. Below that is levels and curves, and we have an actual curves with level sliders at the bottom. And in our subsequent videos, I'm going to go get in a little more depth on levels and curves. Right now, I'm just going to leave it at the default for this. This video gets you a pretty good idea on how to use this software. If you like what you did here, and you'd like to create a preset that you could recall for further or future images, go over here to the left and you could see custom. Click right there and click that little plus, and we could give this a name. And I'm going to call it my HDR. And we're going to click OK. Now you'll see under custom, I have my HDR. It's right there. Now if I go back to my preset library, and let's say for this demonstration, I just click on default to change this back to the default right when I first rendered this image inside of HDR Efex Pro 2. And I want to then apply my custom preset. Go to custom and click there. And it's going to apply all those settings that I just did back to the image. So that will be available now for all future images inside of HDR Efex Pro 2. Below that, you'll see that there's an imported section. If you find any HDR Efex Pro 2 presets on the internet, or you're sharing them with a friend, or you shared them from a friend, you would import them right here. And below that is our history. Every adjustment that was done to this image is done right here. And you could go back in history by just clicking on a spot, and it will bring you back to that point throughout your processing journey, for lack of a better term. But let's go back to that what we finished with. And we're going to save this. So we'll click Save. You can see that it's saving the image. And once it saves it, it closes down. Okay, where did it save it? Now, if we look in our original folder here, it was the TIFF folder. You're going to see it's not there. And if you look in your PSD folder, in this case, it's not there. It's not in that actual root folder. It's not anywhere you could think of, probably. You're going to look for it, look for it, look for it, and not find it. This is kind of a weird thing I found with the program. Where the image is, it's in your root folder. If you have a Mac, it's whatever your root folder was called. In my case, I called it Tony. And there it is right there. There's our image. Now, if you're using a Windows computer, I'm not sure where they're going to put this image. So what I recommend you do, I'm going to just pull it off and put it over there for now. What I recommend you do when you're using HDR Efex Pro 2 as a standalone program, like I just did, don't click Save over here. Don't do that. When you're ready to save the image, go up to File and go to Save Image As. When you do, you'll get to choose what kind of file and where to save it. So you could save it as a JPEG or a TIFF in this case, and actually where you want it. If you want it on your desktop or want it in a specific folder, you'll be able to do that here. So do not click Save over here. Instead, go up to File and go to Save Image As. You also have the keyboard shortcut if you have a Mac of Command S, and if you have a PC, it's Control S to save image as. So make sure you do that so you don't have to search for your image later. And I'm just going to double click on it. There is our finished image, by the way, our exported finished image. So that's it for this episode. In our next episode, I'm going to demonstrate how to use HDR Efex Pro 2 as a Lightroom plugin, and we're going to talk a little bit more about control points in that video.